The moon landing hoax is a conspiracy theory suggesting that the United States never actually landed astronauts on the moon and that the Apollo missions were faked by NASA. This theory first gained prominence in the 1970s and has persisted into the present day. Proponents of the moon landing hoax present various pieces of evidence and arguments to support their claims. Here, we will explore the top 10 pieces of evidence cited by those who believe the moon landings were a hoax. 1. The waving flag. One of the most cited pieces of evidence for the moon landing hoax is the appearance of the American flag in photos and videos from the Apollo missions. Skeptics argue that the flag appears to be waving in the wind, which should be impossible on the moon due to its lack of atmosphere. However, NASA explains that the flag was designed with a horizontal rod along the top to hold it outstretched. The movement observed in the footage is attributed to the astronauts manipulating the flagpole. In the vacuum of space, the flag would continue to move for a longer period due to the lack of air resistance, creating the illusion of waving. 2. The Van Allen radiation belts. The Van Allen radiation belts are two layers of charged particles surrounding the Earth, which are held in place by the planet's magnetic field. Some conspiracy theorists argue that the intense radiation in these belts would have been lethal to the astronauts, making it impossible for them to travel to the moon. NASA counters this claim by stating that the Apollo spacecraft traveled through the belts quickly, minimizing exposure to radiation. Additionally, the spacecraft was equipped with shielding to protect the astronauts. The calculated risk was deemed acceptable for the missions. 3. The lack of stars in photos. Another common argument is the absence of stars in the photographs taken during the Apollo missions. Skeptics argue that if the astronauts were truly on the moon, the night sky should be filled with stars, yet they are not visible in any of the photos. This phenomenon can be explained by the limitations of camera technology at the time. The cameras used were set to capture the bright surface of the moon and the astronauts, which required short exposure times. As a result, the comparatively dim light from the stars did not register on the film. 4. The perfectly framed photos. Critics of the moon landing often point out that many of the photographs taken during the Apollo missions appear to be perfectly framed and well lit, suggesting they were staged in a studio with controlled lighting. NASA explains that the astronauts underwent extensive training in photography and used cameras mounted on their chest plates, allowing for consistent framing. The lighting conditions on the moon, with its lack of atmosphere and the sun as the primary light source, also contributed to the clear and well-defined shadows seen in the photos. 5. The strange shadows. Some moon landing skeptics highlight the unusual angles and lengths of shadows in the photographs, arguing that they indicate multiple light sources, such as those used in a studio setting. On Earth, shadows cast by the sun are generally parallel, but in the moon photos, they appear to converge or diverge, suggesting artificial lighting. This can be explained by the uneven terrain of the lunar surface. Shadows cast on a rough, cratered surface will naturally appear distorted and non-parallel. Additionally, the wide-angle lenses used in the cameras can exaggerate these effects. 6. The anomalous footprints. The clarity and detail of the astronauts' footprints on the moon are often cited as evidence of a hoax. Skeptics argue that such well-defined footprints would not be possible in the dry, powdery lunar dust without moisture. However, the lunar dust, or regolith, is composed of fine, sharp-edged particles that can hold their shape when compressed. The lack of atmosphere and moisture on the moon means there is no weathering or erosion, allowing footprints to remain crisp and well-preserved. 7. The mysterious sea rock. One of the photographs from the Apollo missions shows a rock with a peculiar mark that appears to be the letter C, leading some to believe it was a prop accidentally labeled and placed on a set. NASA and photo analysts argue that the C shape is most likely a printing or photographic artifact, such as a hair or fiber that got stuck during the photo development process. In later high-resolution scans of the same image, the C is not visible, supporting this explanation. 8. The inconsistent gravity. Videos of the astronauts moving on the moon's surface show them bounding in a manner consistent with the moon's lower gravity, which is about 1/6 of Earth's gravity. Conspiracy theorists argue that this could have been easily faked by filming the astronauts on Earth and slowing down the footage. Experts counter that the physics of movement in the lunar environment, such as the dust behavior and the way the astronauts' suits responded to their movements, are consistent with a low-gravity environment and would be difficult to replicate convincingly on Earth. High-speed footage analysis supports the authenticity of the astronauts' movements. 9. The radiation and temperature extremes. Skeptics often claim that the extreme temperatures and radiation on the moon would have made it impossible for the astronauts to survive, let alone conduct their missions. NASA points out that the spacesuits and spacecraft were designed with thermal and radiation protection to safeguard the astronauts. The missions were carefully timed to avoid the most extreme temperature fluctuations, and the technology used was thoroughly tested to ensure it could withstand the harsh conditions of space and the lunar surface. 10. The lack of impact crater. Another argument posed by moon landing deniers is the absence of a significant impact crater beneath the lunar module, which they argue should have been created by the module's descent engine during landing. NASA explains that the lunar module's descent engine was throttled down during the final stages of landing to avoid kicking up excessive dust and debris. The moon's surface is covered with a layer of fine dust, but beneath it is a much harder substrate, which would not necessarily show a dramatic crater from the engine's thrust. Conclusion. The moon landing hoax theory presents various arguments that have intrigued and convinced some people over the years. However, each piece of evidence cited by skeptics has plausible explanations based on scientific principles and the context of the Apollo missions. The overwhelming consensus among experts, scientists, and engineers is that the moon landings were real, and the achievements of the Apollo mission stand as a testament to human ingenuity and determination. While conspiracy theories can be compelling and spark curiosity, it is essential to critically evaluate the evidence and consider the broader scientific and historical context. The moon landings remain one of humanity's greatest accomplishments, celebrated for the technological innovation, bravery, and the spirit of exploration they embody. The moon landing hoax is a conspiracy theory suggesting that the United States never actually landed astronauts on the moon and that the Apollo missions were The moon landing hoax is a conspiracy theory suggesting that the United States never actually landed astronauts on the moon and that the Apollo missions were faked by NASA. The moon landing hoax is a conspiracy theory suggesting that the United States never actually landed astronauts on the moon and that the Apollo missions were faked by NASA. The moon landing hoax is a conspiracy theory suggesting that the United States never actually landed astronauts on the moon and that the Apollo missions were faked by NASA. The moon landing hoax is a conspiracy theory suggesting that the United States never actually landed astronauts on the moon and that the Apollo missions were faked by NASA. This theory first gained prominence. The moon landing hoax is a conspiracy theory suggesting that the United States never actually landed astronauts on the moon and that the Apollo missions were faked by NASA. The moon landing hoax is a conspiracy theory suggesting that the United States never actually landed astronauts on the moon and that the Apollo missions were faked by NASA. This theory first gained prominence. The moon landing hoax is a conspiracy theory suggesting that the United States never actually landed astronauts on the moon and that the Apollo missions were faked by NASA. The moon landing hoax is a conspiracy theory suggesting that the United States never actually landed astronauts on the moon and that the Apollo missions were faked by NASA. The moon landing hoax is a conspiracy theory suggesting that the United States never actually landed astronauts on the moon and that the Apollo missions were faked by NASA. The moon landing hoax is a conspiracy theory suggesting that the United States never actually landed astronauts on the moon and that the Apollo missions were faked by NASA. The moon landing hoax is a conspiracy theory suggesting that the United States never actually landed astronauts on the moon and that the Apollo missions were faked by NASA. The moon landing hoax is a conspiracy theory suggesting that the United States never actually landed astronauts on the moon and that the Apollo missions were faked by NASA. This theory first gained prominence in the 90s. The moon landing hoax is a conspiracy theory suggesting that the United States never actually landed astronauts on the moon and that the Apollo missions were faked by NASA. This theory The moon landing hoax is a conspiracy theory suggesting that the United States never actually landed astronauts on the moon and that the Apollo missions were faked by NASA. This theory first